The Garmin Forerunner 970 and the Garmin Forerunner 570 are the latest watches in the Garmin Forerunner lineup. They are both significant upgrades to their predecessors and are now closer in some ways, but further apart in others. If you're trying to decide between these two watches, there are a few key differences that I'm going to share with you, which can help you decide which one is best for you. Hi everybody, foXnoMad here, and today I want to help you travel smarter by comparing the Garmin Forerunner 970 to the Garmin Forerunner 570. Now I have full reviews of both of these watches, so I recommend you check those out. But if you're new to the Garmin lineup or are thinking of upgrading to either of these watches, 970 or 570 is a question you're most likely to ask yourself. So here are the key differences. But first, if you're not already, make sure that you're subscribed to the channel, and let's get started. The 970 is Garmin's top-of-the-line Forerunner and an update to the previous 965 model. The 570 is an update to the 265 and 265S. The 970 only comes in one size, which is 47mm, whereas the 570 has two size options, one 47mm and the other 42mm. Even though there are two sizes for the 570, Garmin has dropped the S designation on the smaller 570, so it's just a 570 that happens to be 42mm, or a 570 that happens to be 47mm. The 970 comes in three colors, black, white stone, or soft gold, but none of them are especially vibrant, although all of them have a titanium bezel. The 570 has a black version for both the 47 and 42mm versions, and two other color variations that are different for the larger and smaller sizes. Personally, I like the brighter colors of the aluminum bezels on the 570. I'm not someone who would normally pick out a light colored watch, but the yellow aluminum could change my mind. You can of course swap out the bands if you want to change the colors up a little bit, and the 570 comes with a translucent quick release band that is easier to swap out. The 970 has translucent bands as well, but they're not the quick release version, so if you want to change the ones that come out of the box, it's just going to be a little bit more hassle to do. Size options, color options, and bezel differences. That's titanium for the 970 and aluminum for the 570, though both should be fairly durable and mostly scratch resistant. The glass of the 970 though is sapphire crystal, whereas the 570 is Corning Gorilla Glass 3, not quite as scratch resistant. I'm team screen protector, so I worry a bit less about the glass getting scuffed up, but if lens durability is very important to you, the 970 has stronger glass. The 570 is 6 grams lighter than the 970, and you do notice it in the hand. Of course, the smaller 570 is even lighter, but part of the weight difference between the 970 and the 570 is one underappreciated feature that the 570 lacks that the 970 has, and that is a flashlight. These are both light watches, but the 970 is the only one that has a light built in. The flashlight has 3 white modes that get as bright as a modern cell phone and a red light as well. You can set the flashlight to strobe when you're running as a safety feature, but all around it comes in handy more often than you might expect. Unfortunately, the 570 doesn't have a flashlight, although you can use the flashlight mode to use the screen to slightly brighten up things up close in the dark, but it's really not going to replace what you have on the 970. And even though the 970 has a flashlight whereas the 570 doesn't, the 970 gets a few more days of battery life. The 570 has about 11 days of battery life in smartwatch mode, whereas the 970 is 15 days. GPS on times for the 970 are about 26 to 21 hours, and on the 570 it's around 18 to 14 hours, depending on what satellite modes you're using, the screen brightness, and whether or not you're streaming music. Both the 570 and the 970 have screens that are a lot brighter than their predecessors, which is something you'll appreciate when you're outdoors in sunny conditions. You won't have any trouble seeing the screens. And the 570 now has the same screen resolution as the 970. That wasn't the case on the previous models, but now both of these watches have a 454 by 454 pixel display. They're both bright, vibrant, and the colors are saturated and pop and are just nice to look at. Overall, both the 970 and the 570 have a similar look, with 3 buttons on the left and 2 buttons on the right. The 970 has a metal plate with the word Forerunner etched into it, and it's the only real color accent on the 970, whereas the 570 has the word Forerunner etched into the hard plastic body in the same color as the watch. They both look very good and very premium, and holding these and looking at these up close, you don't inherently feel like the 970 is more expensive than the 570 just based on looks. The difference between these two watches gets even closer. Both of these watches were upgraded with a microphone and speaker compared to their predecessors, and you can now make and take calls when your phone is paired with these watches. Both also have offline voice commands you can use to set a countdown timer or check the weather, among a bunch of other watch functions. It's a feature I've been using a lot for things like setting an alarm because it's just quicker than clicking through menus and scrolling through the hours and minutes. You can also use the voice commands to record your current location on both the 970 and the 570. This is a useful feature if you're outside and you're running and you want to return somewhere, or maybe in a couple of days you want to return to that point in a park, for example. But the main difference between these two watches, even though you can record your location, the 970 is the only one that comes with built-in maps. The 970 has full navigation features, so you can search for points of interest, landmarks, or other set points to get on-the-go directions as you're walking, running, or cycling, for example. For those of you who travel frequently, being able to simply set the watch to create a 10-kilometer run and give you direction prompts in a new city is a very useful feature. The 570 has a breadcrumb feature you can use to get back to a starting point, but it's not overlaid on a map, so you won't get those turn-by-turn directions. You also won't get estimated arrival times on the 570, unlike the 970, where if you're cycling, for example, to a specific location, it will give you an ETA based on your current speed and route. Speaking of routing and GPS, one thing I've noticed with the 970 is that it's a little bit quicker to lock on. The 970 tends to lock on quicker to a GPS signal, even when you're indoors but near a window and it has to struggle. It does a better job of connecting with the satellites. During my testing, even in some wide open spaces, it took the 570 5 to 15 seconds longer to acquire a signal than the 970. This may be due to software version differences and not so much hardware differences, I'm not quite so sure, and I probably wouldn't have noticed this difference in the GPS connection times if the watches weren't side by side, and it's not a very long time in general in both cases, but I do appreciate the 970's snappy GPS connections because it means fewer moments waiting before I can get running. Built-in maps and a flashlight. Those are two of the biggest differences between the 970 and the 570. It's also worth noting that for the $550 price tag of the 570, you can find competing watches from other brands that will have maps built in. The 570 is also missing a few new data screens and fields that the 970 has, like the running tolerance widget that shows how much distance and weekly running volume you can take. But those are all icing on the cake features. Everything else you would need, pace, distance measured by GPS, and a whole long list of sport modes, it's all on the 570. And of course, you also get constant heart rate monitoring. And both the 570 and the 970 now have Garmin's Generation 5 Elevate heart rate sensor, which gives you a little bit more accuracy than the Gen 4. Still pretty close, but hey, it's an upgrade. You also get skin temperature monitoring, which helps with the sleep score, and you also get ECG. Well, not quite. Even though both watches have the required hardware to take an electrocardiogram that can detect irregular heartbeats, it's not enabled on the 570. I don't think most of you will care because it's a feature you'll use once and probably seldom after. ECG is fun to have, but not going to replace actual medical checkups. Garmin does this with all of their watches across all of their lines to an extent, where they'll limit features intentionally even though the hardware is capable of it. So for example, this watch can do ECG, but Garmin has intentionally disabled that functionality so you can't do it. For that, you need to upgrade to the 970. And if we're going to talk about Garmin limiting features to the watch, I don't think ECG is going to make a difference to any of you, and it shouldn't be really an important part of your decision-making process. The list of significant differences between the 970 and the 570 has shrunk. So I guess Garmin figured, hey, let's just remove the ECG feature because it's something we're talking a lot about right now. So it might seem important enough to warrant getting the 970 over the 570, but in reality, it's not. For a $50 difference between these two watches for ECG and the flashlight, would that be worth it? Yeah, I think so. How about for a $100 difference, a flashlight and ECG? Yeah, that might still be worth it for $100 more. But for $200, that's a bigger sell because you see the 970 is now $749, which is $200 more than the 570. And that's the biggest difference between these two watches are the price jumps. So the 970 goes up to $750 over $600 that the 965 was being sold for, whereas the 570 is now $550, which is just a $50 price increase from the 265. And if we're comparing the price changes between these two watches, the 570 got a lot of improvements over the 265, And so for $50 more over the 265 when it was being sold new, this is a big, big, big upgrade. Whereas the 970 didn't get as many upgrades and many updates and as many features to me to warrant a big $150 price jump. And that's not to mention that the 965 and 265 are still being sold on sale new and are heavily discounted. That gives you even more options in the Garmin lineup. I would say if a microphone and speaker and the flashlight aren't very important to you, but you want built-in maps, then take a close look at the 965. Aside from the price, it does have a few other advantages over the 970, like longer battery life, and it's a little bit lighter as well. I feel like the 570 should really just be the 970 for $600. So you have your top of the line Forerunner watch, which is $600 with the maps and the flashlight and all of that. And then you get the 570 for like $300-400 price range. Maybe you use a little bit less premium hardware. Maybe you remove some more of the software features, or you just do something to differentiate a little bit more between the 570 and the 970 and then drop this down in price. But maybe that's just wishful thinking because Garmin is clearly looking forward and looking up when it comes to the price. Garmin's pricing ladder has some odd jumps and some feature variations that don't make a whole lot of sense. And this is one of them. The Forerunner 570 is the watch that makes the most sense for the most people in terms of build, in terms of features, and in terms of price, at least using Garmin logic. The 970 is a great smartwatch, but you can find competing watches from Coros or Suunto or even Apple that have built-in maps that cost a lot less. But if you really want to have maps on your Garmin Forerunner, the 965 looks like a great deal right now. Otherwise, you can get the upgraded 970 for the downgraded price. Thanks for watching. I hope this comparison helps you decide between the 970 and the 570, but let me know if you're trying to decide between these two watches, what are some of the features that are really important to you? And if you have either of these watches, what were some of the deciding factors? Let me know down in the comments below. And while you're down there, hit the like and subscribe buttons. I'll have new videos for you every week, and I'll see you in the next video.